My story takes place about 12 years ago. I was 15 and spent the summer with my best friend Alan. During the week, we would stay at his mother's house, which was usually uneventful. But on the weekends, we got to go to his grandma's house. Her house was way up in the mountains about an hour from civilization. Her house was the oldest on the family farm. The farm was completely self-sufficient. They grew their own food, raised their own cattle, and everything else that goes along with owning a farm. Alan's grandma was about 91 years old, and very odd. She would tell us stories about the farm, people dying, ghost sightings, and creepy legends. She would really freak us out. She would sit in the living room and talk to an empty chair as if a person was sitting there, or lay in bed and whisper to someone and laugh. But no one was ever there. One night, Alan's grandma told us a story, and I'll never forget what happened afterwards. She said one day about 20 years ago, her son, James, had a horrible experience while riding his horse next to the family cemetery. James was checking the fence that separated the family property from the neighboring family's property. It was raining outside and the thunder and lightning was starting to get heavy. As James decided to turn around and come home, he heard what he described as a young child crying. James slowed his horse to a brisk walk and tried to look through the rain to see if he could see the child. As he came to the cemetery, he saw a child sitting in the middle of the field. The child was facing away from him and had a hooded type of blanket on, with the hood covering the child's face. James got off his horse and walked over to the child. The child was just rocking back and forth and continually getting louder and louder as it cried. James put his hand on the child's shoulder and asked the child if he could help. The child immediately stopped rocking back and forth and stopped crying. The child then turned its head completely backwards, while its body stayed facing forward. The child then looked at James. He became horrified. The child was an adult with a gray face and black lips. James couldn't see the eyes, but he could see that it was smiling. James began to run to his horse but fell in the mud. He quickly got up and made it to the horse. He began to ride away as fast as the horse could run. As James rode away, he could hear the child crying as if it was right next to his ear. After riding fast and hard for a couple of minutes, James felt excruciating pain on both of his sides. He turned around to find the evil crying thing sitting on his horse with him with its hand around its sides. James screamed at it and told it to let him go. He turned around one last time to pry the thing off him and saw that the hood had fallen, revealing its head. James said he saw himself in the huge dark red eyes of the thing. He said when the thing noticed James could see its eyes, it smiled, and as quickly as it happened, it was over. That thing was gone. James went home and told his mother what had happened. After listening to the story, Alan and I were scared. We went to our room and talked about the story we had just heard. Our room was directly south of the family cemetery, and we could see the gates from the moon shining on it. As Alan was talking to me, I saw something small moving about in the field. I told Alan, and he could see it too. We both stared at it, and then it stopped as if it noticed us. I felt terrified. Alan said, "Look, it's looking right at us." I could only see what looked like some type of hood thing walking towards us. And then it began to run towards us. Not slowly, but fast. Almost abnormally fast. All the while it appeared like it was looking right at us. Alan and I ducked behind the window, and right at that moment, a loud thump hit the wall outside. Then I heard what sounded like a child crying. I ran as fast as I could to the living room of the house. Alan was right behind me. As I got to the living room and turned the light on, I saw that Alan had been so scared he peed his pants. I don't know what we saw, and I don't know why we saw it. We told Alan's grandma the next day, and she said it was a demon that had followed her around since she was little and pops up from time to time when she says the story. The scariest part was that she said it so matter-of-factly, as if what she had just said was normal. Alan and I have told this story so many times. Some people believe me, and some don't. I don't care whether people believe it or not. I tell this story because I have never heard a story like it or had an experience like it since. I stopped trying to make sense of it because it just freaks me out more. A few months ago, I bought my very first house that was out in the country. I decided to make the move out here, mostly because I have lived most of my life in a noisy town. So I needed peace and quiet. At my new home, I have only 2 neighbors, who are the nicest people welcoming me. Skip about 2 weeks ahead. By then, I had everything moved into my house. One night, I started to hear weird sounds from the basement between 2 and 5 in the morning. The sounds ranged between quiet banging and shuffling around. I was scared and I didn't dare get up in the dark. Eventually, I went back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went to the kitchen and checked the basement door. I then noticed that the basement door had a heavy-duty lock on it. I didn't recall putting in this lock on the door. I went looking for the key until I eventually found it behind the kitchen door, hidden inside a cabinet. I grabbed the flashlight and my small army pocket knife, just in case there was an animal inside trying to get out. I unlocked it and slowly opened the door with my flashlight on, until I found the switch and turned on the lights. Everything looked like a normal basement with the water pump and all that stuff. But then, at the farther end of the basement room corner, I discovered a corner of 2 concrete walls with an old-style white door. This door had no window to peek inside. I opened the door, and the room was nearly pitch black. After briefly scanning it with my flashlight, the room appeared to be about 5 by 6 meters long. It was just an empty room with no lights. But boy, was I completely wrong about the room being empty. After a few seconds, I heard faint shuffling in the room and moved the flashlight towards the corner of the small room. I saw a tall figure with a V-shaped head and the body of a mangled human. It appeared to turn around, and that's when I could describe it a little bit more. The eyes were solid white, and they had what looked like scribbles on them, making them look cursed, almost like from a horror movie. Then it screamed at me and started to chase me out of the basement. I dropped my knife at that point because I was afraid of this thing. I ran to the door before quickly closing it and locked it so it wouldn't get out. I could hear it quietly clawing and making the same sounds as the ones I've heard almost every night since. The next day, I decided to board up the door with 5 boards and grab chains and locked it tight together so that demon wouldn't be able to break out. It's almost active at night with the banging and scratching. I had so many questions that I reached out to my neighbor. I was told that their dad told them a story of a man who performed dark magic. He ended up cursing the land and house with a demon that would forever torment those who chose to live here until they move away and off the land. This curse basically served as a deterrent, preventing new people from moving into the land. Now here are some of the questions I asked myself after talking to my neighbor. Why is that thing in my basement making these noises and trying to hurt me? What was its purpose? Why is it in there in the first place? I don't want to hear or see it anymore. I don't know how to get rid of this thing, or just to make it leave me alone. This has been going on non-stop every night for weeks now, and I can't make it stop. If anyone can help me with this issue, I would greatly appreciate it. I don't want to move out because I would have nowhere else to go. Please help me on how to get rid of this thing. Thank you. I was driving towards Prescott, Arizona, with my girlfriend Becky, who was dozing off in the seat next to me. Rolling the window partially down in the hopes that the cool air would keep me alert, I warily kept driving my Chevy down this narrow highway road, with nothing but a thick forested area on the passenger side of me. There was mostly open meadowland, with a few clumps of trees here and there along the driver's side of the road. I had wanted to leave first thing in the morning on Friday, but Becky was called into work at the last minute, so we ended up leaving at close to 8 o'clock that night. Knowing we had to head back before early Monday, I didn't want to wait until the next day to go and end up losing a good chunk of a Saturday to hang out. So here I was. It had to be close to at least 10 p.m. by then, driving by the light of my dim headlights with a close to full moon overhead. I noticed some smoke or steam coming out from the sides of my car hood. This, in and of itself, was not unusual, as the car was close to 15 years old, dented up a bit, with the dimmer than usual lights and hoses that seemed to know the most inopportune time to break. Add to that a radiator that overheated during the summer months or when in use for long periods of time. This being early October, I hadn't given the radiator much thought. It hadn't bothered to act up since August, and as the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. But something sure was putting off plumes under the hood, so I nudged Becky and explained in short that I had to pull over. As I slowed down a bit, Becky rolled down her window and peered along the edges of the dark wall of pine trees. "Up there," she exclaimed, pointing forward. "About 20 feet or so there's a dirt shoulder of some kind." Slowing to a crawl, feeling safe at the moment as another car hadn't passed us for a number of miles now, I quickly saw the flat dirt indent about a length and width of 2 cars, just to the right of the road. The dirt area, much like the whole side of the road, was lined by knotted mass of trees, giving it the look of a half circle cut down the middle by the road. I pulled over and turned the car off, leaving the keys hanging from the ignition. With the headlights on, I got out of the car and walked in front of it, popping the hood. I had grabbed a flashlight out of the glove box, and so proceeded to inspect the damage. Sure enough, the radiator had overheated. I bent down a little to peek between the crack of the hood's bottom edge and the top of the car front, to look at Becky through the front windshield. I was going to call out to ask her to grab the gallon bottle of water I kept behind the front seat, there since August at least, so once it cooled a bit, I could add water to the radiator. Expecting to see her dozing off or looking towards me, I was surprised to see her staring wide-eyed, mouth agape, out in the direction of the driver's side window. She was white as a ghost. "What are you doing?" I demanded to know. She kept staring out at the meadow fields, only raising her arm slightly to the point in the direction she was looking. "What?" I snapped, walking back towards the driver's door. As I did, I looked out into the moonlit meadow. I saw a short line of trees in the distant background, a small pine of about 20-25 feet out, directly in line with the back end of the car, and running about 10 feet from the point forward, in a line almost parallel with the road, was a short brick wall, about 3 feet or so high. A sparse forested area began about 40 feet or so from the wall's edges, in either directions of the small meadow. I looked back at her. "So? Probably part of an old house or a fence. What's the big deal about the wall?" As I got into the car and shut the door to wait for the innards to cool, she replied slowly and quietly, "It isn't the brick wall. It's what I saw looking at us over the top of the wall." I turned to her. What? Quit messing around. Screw you, she hissed. If I... Then she stopped talking, and her gaze drifted past me, to the wall. I turned to look. I saw a small, translucent, white, stocky humanoid form, just shy of 3 feet tall. Its round eyes from this distance appearing as black as night. Standing in front of the wall, it slowly took a step or two towards us, its short, chubby arms at its side. I screamed and tried to turn on the flashlight. I knew the batteries were low and sometimes had to jiggle it and turn the cap slightly to get it to work. So, in my excitement, I twisted the cap and the batteries flew out and I just about dirtied my pants. As the batteries were now rolling under the seat and across the floor of the car, I decided to forget that. I looked up and saw the hood was still up and froze. He's going back, Becky then whispered. I looked out of the moonlit field again, just in time to see this thing scamper around the side of the wall, out of view. As Becky quickly rolled up to her car window, I said I was going to shut the hood. To hell with the water. If the radiator didn't burn out, we stopped down the road and add water. Give me the bottle. I'll dump some in the reservoir and shut the hood. You just start the car, Becky replied. As she got out of the car and went to the front, I turned the key. The engine groaned, trying to turn over. I looked from the steering wheel to Becky pouring the water into the reservoir to the wall and back again. As Becky slammed the hood shut, I looked towards the wall, to the small, white head of the ghostly entity peering over the top of it. Get in the car, I yelled, as the creature's tiny hands gripped the top of the wall, and it raised itself clean over, landing on its feet, running towards us. Becky jumped in the passenger side, locking her door. She no longer had the bottle, which couldn't have been more than half empty now. But, under the circumstances, I didn't ask, and I didn't care. I turned the key, and it wouldn't turn on. Oh God, Becky murmured. I didn't want to look. I just turned the key again. Still just that tired groan. Becky leaned over, reaching past me, hitting the door lock with one hand, while rolling the windows up with the other. And it was one of those older manual window knob roll-up jobs. Hurry, she cried, frightened as she sat back up. With one more turn of the key, the car finally started, and I punched the accelerator. I looked towards the field. That little thing was only a few feet from the edge of the road, but thankfully it was on the edge of the other side of the road. It was still close enough that I could see its eyes, which were indeed dark, empty holes. Its mouth was open now, in a wide, leering grin, and I could have sworn it had small, pointed teeth, but it all happened so fast. Its skin or surface seemed to be rolling as the entire creature ran at my car. As we headed down the road, I turned my rearview mirror in such a way that I could see it, quite a bit back now, turning away from us, walking along the side of the road in the opposite direction. I watched the road ahead. Then Becky screamed. She had been half-turned looking back at the creature too. Now she bent straight over, her head buried in her hands. I turned my rearview mirror to and fro, but only saw the road. It was gone. We drove another 20 minutes or so with the car smoking a small portion of the way. The car overheated again as we entered the outskirts of town. Only then would Becky let me stop. As we parked and waited for the first gas station we hit, I asked what had happened. I was watching it. It stopped at the edge of the road, she answered. I know, I saw it walking away. Yeah, she hesitated. It was walking away. But as it walked away, its head turned all the way around, still grinning as it watched us drive away. Needless to say, when we headed back, we left at 10 a.m. to make sure we get back long before nightfall. I grew up as a middle child. I had 2 siblings way older than me, as well as 2 that were way younger than me. I grew up on a road that was a community inside of a community. Everyone on this road had at least 2 generations, if not more. My family has 4 generations of history on this property. I grew up lonely because I was too young to run with the older kids and too old to sit and play blocks with the little kids. The neighborhood kids were the same way. There was only one boy that was my age, but he's a different story for another day. When I was 6 or 7, I had a memory of playing in the woods out back with an older man. There was an old shed back in the woods a little way from my house, and that's where I'd meet him. We would sit and talk, and since I didn't have anyone else who wanted to play with me, this man was appealing. Like I said, he was older, so he looked like a hard worker wearing farm clothes, which were always dirty. We'd talk and play games, and then he'd tell me that I'd better go back to my mama, and he'd walk with me to the edge of the woods. And then he'd turn around and take a few steps. By the time I turned around, he'd always be gone. This continued for about a year, and then I became old enough for school and had friends, so I forgot about my friend in the woods. When I was 15, my mom and I were going through some pictures. We got to a picture where there was the man, the one I played with years ago. I asked my mother who he was, and he was my great-grandfather's farmhand. I asked how that was since I remember him from my childhood. I wasn't about to admit I spent time with him in the woods when I wasn't supposed to go near them. I also remember the fact that Paul, my great-grandfather, died 18 years before I was born. My mother got this weird look on her face and told me, "No, you didn't know him because he died long before your grandmother was born. In fact, he died young after an accident in the field. When Paul was baling hay, the man got caught in the baler and was pulled through. He died in a nearby old house a couple of hours later." I was sure that the man in the picture was the man I played with. Later, I went back to find the shed to convince myself that I wasn't crazy. I found it and went inside. It looked like a regular shed left exactly how it was when I'd last been there. So, I ran to get Mom to show her the shed, but when I led her there, nothing. To this day, I still haven't been able to find the shed where the older man lived in. I am very convinced that I talked and played with the man that died almost 100 years before I was born. Despite being a little creeped out, I was very lonely back then, and I am very grateful that he returned to keep me company. I am very convinced that my family and I lived in a haunted house. This house was on the outskirts of Los Angeles near the city of Vernon. Though my mom had more incidents while living there, I can honestly say I witnessed 1, perhaps 2 experiences. For the record, I never felt as if the house was unwelcoming or heard anything out of the ordinary. It was a small house with 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a little hallway leading towards the bathroom, which was at the back of the house. The first encounter occurred when I was 23 back in 2003. I never believed in the paranormal, even after hearing stories of that kind from friends and family. If anything unusual took place, I would always explain them away as a figment of my imagination. Yet, these couple of incidents have kept me wondering to this very day. At the time, I had 2 jobs. I had little time to exercise. I thought about jogging around the neighborhood. However, with the frequent incidents of crime coupled with cars carelessly hitting pedestrians, I thought it better to exercise in my room. I grew into the habit of playing loud music while sprinting back and forth in the dark. Doing this did work up a sweat as I moved from one side of the room to the other. One night, I decided to borrow one of my mom's red peller candles. Instead of jogging in the dark, I decided to place this candle on my desk chair and have it lit in the dark. I made sure the chair was on the other side of the room, right in front of the door. Looking up at the ceiling, there was a strange shadowy division where half of the room was lit while the other side remained in semi-darkness. I would see the lit candle from the corner of my eye every time I would turn before running towards the other side just before reaching my closet. Having Bon Jovi's song Keep the Faith thundering loudly in my room, I was running harder and harder, always seeing the candle's light flicker with my movement. Sweating very much while breathing hard through my nose, I was very determined to move faster and faster. Yet suddenly, the moment just before turning, while my right eye had a side view of the lit blood red candle, a black figure emerged from it and sprinted towards me. In that split second, I saw that shadow run behind me as I turned to head towards the other side. As I kept running back and forth, I felt chills of cold sweat. I spent the next couple of minutes trying to process what I saw. After the song ended, I decided to turn on the light. I went in front of the chair and stared into the candle and kept replaying what I saw repeatedly. If this was just another mind trick, then why did I feel as if something else was in my room, watching me? I blew out the candle and promptly gave it back to my mom. I had no idea what prompted me to see a black shadow mimic me by sprinting past me. I wonder if the lit candle had anything to do with it. Soon after, I decided to get a gym membership at Bally's. The second occurrence was just as frightening. Between 2007 and 2008, my mom left the country to visit family. At the time, my brother would bring his girlfriend over during the late nights. I would have the house all to myself during most evenings. Every night, before going to sleep, I would keep my room door open just so I know when my brother comes home. One night, I could not fall asleep and kept staring up at the ceiling. With the faint ticking of the clock in my room, my eyes then rested on the green digital clock of the stove that stood beyond the doorway of my room. The stove had a muted white color that still stood out in the darkness. I kept staring at the clock and waited for it to turn 2:30 a.m. While waiting, suddenly the shape of a black head peered over the doorway, covering the green digits of the stove. I was petrified, staring at the head that was obviously looking at me. I did not dare move as the head stood perfectly still. The head was completely round and black. What seemed like minutes, the head held its ground and observed me. But after about 20 seconds, the head retreated from the doorway to the right. While watching the green ditches of the stove, I listened for footsteps or any sounds to indicate that it was maybe my brother checking in on me to see if I was awake so he could sneak in his girlfriend. But the house stood quiet, except for the faint clock ticking. By morning, I got up and went to the living room and knocked on my brother's door. After a few knocks, I opened the door and discovered that his bed was undisturbed. I called him with pure anxiety and asked him if he had come over last night. Before he could answer, I asked him if he peered over into my room to see if I was asleep. There was a long pause until he cleared his voice and said, "Yeah, I did." Well, that was good enough for me, and then proceeded to scold him to not ever do that again. Deep down, I don't believe that it was my brother who stared at me that night. In that moment, I felt the exact same way I did on the night I saw that shadow barreling towards me. In all, I lived in that house for a total of 9 years. Between the sprinting shadow and the peering head, those are experiences I will not wish upon anyone else. I'm a female from a small residential town in Canada, British Columbia. Being 21 at the time, my story took place between 2016 and 2017. I'm not too sure which month, but I know it was in the fall after around 2 weeks of working in the community school. Okay, for the first few paranormal experiences that happened to me was in the broad office. That's like a minute walk from the back of the school. I knew I was in the broad office alone because I would always check to see if there was someone staying late. And so, after I checked around to make sure not to scare anyone, I went downstairs where there was a meeting room that was used for storage, and open space for shelves to store files and whatnot, and plus the washroom in the back corner. So, I usually clean the washroom first before I get up to cleaning the offices upstairs. After cleaning the washroom, I grabbed the garbage, and as I was leaving the washroom, I heard an unrecognizable lady's voice say, "You fucking bitch," to the right side of me. I had my wired earphones hanging off my ear just to hear my music. I looked over my shoulder to see no one standing in the dark corner. I swear my heart almost stopped. When I saw no one there, I then booked it back up the stairs and calmed myself down. I went back to cleaning, but as I was walking around, I looked out the window to see if there might have been someone outside, but no one was around. Another time I went up to clean the broad office. It was sometime in October, so it was getting dark earlier. I cleaned out the offices before I went down to the washroom downstairs. After I cleaned the washroom, I began sweeping the floors down there. As I was sweeping, I heard footsteps outside near the stairs. I would always lock the door when I was in the broad office. Then there was the distinct sound of the door unlocking. I heard the door open and then close, so I sorta yelled to let whoever came inside know that I was there cleaning and apologize if I scared them. But there was no response back nor any sounds of footsteps. I'm thinking, okay, maybe they didn't hear me, so I repeated myself, and then I walked towards the office door saying, "Hello?" Nothing. I then went to the front door to see if anyone was there. While it looked like I was alone, I did notice that the door was unlocked when I knew I locked it myself. I then stammered, "To hell with this," while grabbing all the garbage in the hallway where I left them. I looked up towards the back offices, and suddenly one of the doors slammed shut. I ran out, locked the door behind me, and went back to the school, shaking. It was so bad that I had a panic attack. Eventually, I called someone to go and check the broad office. Finding it empty went a long way to helping me calm down. This next part happened in the actual school. For reference, this is an idea of the layout. So I worked at the left wing of the community school, and there was a teacher's office next to a few classrooms, a storage room, and there was also a door that led downstairs to a furnace room with even more storage rooms. Meaning, there were stairs that would go down and then turn to the left, leading to 3 doors. I would take my dinner break in the teacher's office. I was sitting down at a table next to the door in the office. I was having my dinner and watching something on YouTube when suddenly I heard a few soft knocks on a door in the hallway. I paused the video and looked out the doorway to see if someone needed me for something, but no one was there. For about a minute, I sat there listening to see if it happened again. Then, as I went to resume the video, I heard scratching on the door right across the hallway from the room I was in. I got up to walk over to outside the furnace room door while holding on to my phone in case I needed to call my manager. As I got close, I announced, "Hello, you shouldn't be in there." I then grabbed the doorknob and turned it, but it was locked. It sounded like someone or something was moving around on the other side, so I started calling my manager, and as he picked up, there was a loud bang on the door. I jumped back as I kinda yelled into the phone telling him what I thought was going on. After confirming that my manager heard the bang, I heard more movement right behind the door. I tried to open the door again, yelling, "You can't be in there. If you leave now, I won't call the cops." I tried the door again and it opened this time. And nothing. The lights were off the whole time, and when I flicked them on, I looked over the room only to see a shadow person's head leaning over the corner, and it quickly pulled its head back to hide. It was so weird because the lights were so bright that I should have been able to see the face clearly, but instead just made out a black shape. I closed the door and waited a few minutes for my manager to show up. I was shaking the whole time thinking back on what just happened. The manager arrived and went down to check things out. After a couple of minutes, he came back to tell me that there was no one down there. With everything locked up, the manager said there wasn't any indication of trespassing. Another time, while on dinner break, I was accompanied by one of my male friends who was covering for one of the other janitors. We were in the same office having our dinner, each watching our own videos on our phones. And yes, I already told them what happened to me before. While sitting there eating, I heard a long scratch on a door nearby. I couldn't tell where it came from, but I had a hunch on where to investigate. I looked at him and asked, "Did you hear that?" He nodded, looking shocked. After pausing my video, I opened a ghost detector app called Spritebox that I had on my phone and started it. After a few seconds, a few random words popped up. I don't remember all the words, but what stuck with me to this day were words like angry, stairs, and fire. We stared at each other while freaking out a little bit when we both looked towards the door. As I stood up, the door opened slightly. I told him to have the manager's number dialed on his phone just in case. I then ran over to pull the door open, but I saw and heard nothing. The lights were left on this time. My friend slowly walked over as I stepped through the door to look, only to find no one there this time. However, I heard footsteps running into one of the rooms down below, so I started to go downstairs yelling, "Hey, you need to get out of here." I told my friend to call the manager. As I got to the corner, I saw one of the doors slowly closing. Before I can open it up again, it was fully closed and locked. I yelled while knocking on the door, "Hey, who is in there? You need to leave." I heard no movement for a bit while I tried to open the door, but then I heard a loud bang behind me from another door. I thought to myself, "To hell with this," and started running back up the stairs telling my friend to watch my back in case someone tried to come after me. As I got closer to him, he told me he saw the same thing I did before, a shadowy figure, only that its arms was reaching out towards me. I just stepped onto the top stairs when the lights went off. But thankfully, my friend moved back into the hallway as I ran out and closed the door and held it as our manager rushed towards us. We told him what happened, and then he checked things out. Nothing was wrong, but this time, there were small, soft scratches on the furnace room door. There were 3 of them. Only 3 aisles left to stock up before I could take a break. Shortly after graduating high school, I got a job at a convenience store. I liked the job very much because they were accommodating to my college schedule. So, I mainly worked closing shift from 5 to 11:30 p.m. There was this coworker named Hugo, who I worked with frequently during the night shifts. He and I talked a lot about a wide variety of things. His focus was on the darker side of things. I didn't find anything wrong with that since I was kind of curious myself. On top of it all, he seemed like a good guy who was just curious about that stuff. On this evening while on our closing shift, Hugo approached me in the vitamins aisle. "Hey, let me ask you something," he half whispered as he slid right next to me. I looked at him in acknowledgement. "Have you ever played with the Ouija board?" I shook my head as I turned to look at him. Nah, I heard that's dangerous. Have you? He just smiled as he raised the miniature Ouija board keychain at me. Not yet. I knew where he was going with this. Uh-oh, no, not with me. Oh, come on. It's all for fun. Do you really think this stuff really exists? I slowly nodded. And besides, even if it's real, do you think there would be any spirits lurking around this store? I don't know, I mumbled as I walked away. And you don't even have a pointer. He opened a small opening in the Ouija keyboard and took out the planchette. Hey man, it looks like you planned this out pretty well, huh? I said as he grinned. I made him help me stock up my last 3 hours before taking a break. Alright, let's get it over with, I sighed as I walked towards the break room. We stood across from each other over the table with the miniature board centered. The pointer was so small, we each donated a finger to get it ready. And so, there we were standing over the Ouija board. Go, begin, I echoed as I struggled to keep my finger in place of the pointer. He looked up at the ceiling, no doubt thinking of what question to ask. I thought it better to offer friendly words first. We are humbly here tonight to communicate with anyone out there. We looked at each other as the room stood silent. Is there anyone presently with us? Again, we looked around the taciturn break room, and then we looked at each other as the pointer came to life. The pointer slowly slid to the Y to our dismay. Did you just do that? I mumbled as I backed away from the table. Nah, you did it, man, he stammered as he too backed away near the exit door. I looked at him straight in the eye and said I did not move the pointer at all. We kept staring at the mini Ouija board for a while. We then looked at each other and began approaching the table again. Well, we have to communicate with the spirit now, I bravely announced. We each placed a finger on the pointer. I hesitated, but I thought I should take the lead on this since Hugo looked as though he was going to faint. Welcome. Please tell us your name. After a few moments of us looking around, the pointer moved yet again. It first glided to P, and then A. I stared at him, at an attempt to read him and determine if he was indeed moving the pointer, because it certainly was not me. All the while he kept staring at the board in disbelief. I caught the last letter the pointer visited. O. Pablo, he whispered, as he slowly took his eyes off the board and looked at me. Pablo, in your past life, what did you do? I firmly asked. The pointer came to life again. C-O-O-K. Cook. He was a chef? Maybe he could cook something for us, he whispered while chuckling. I shook my head in disapproval at him. Thank you for being with us tonight. Please be well and may you be happy wherever you go. Goodbye. The pointer quickly flinched to goodbye. We both exhaled a sigh of relief. Hey, what's wrong with you? I said as I slapped him in the back. He could have easily gotten upset for making the comment you made about him cooking. Sorry, I thought it was cool that he was once a cook. And plus, I got hungry, he murmured as he walked away. After we got back out on the sales floor, he decided to tell Manny from pharmacy about our little encounter. Dude, you guys shouldn't be doing that, Manny said sternly. You guys can open the gates of hell and not even know it. Hugo frowned while I was unfazed. Even your family could get harmed as a result of doing this, he continued. After we both pledged not to do that again, we were both allowed to leave. The next day after coming into work, Hugo ran frantically towards me. Dude, I think he followed me home, he said while his eyes darted from side to side to see whether someone else heard him. Calm down, I whispered as he took a deep breath. Okay, so what happened? It was late, and for some reason I woke up with a thirst that I've never felt before, he said as he looked over his shoulder for a third time. As I made my way to the kitchen, I had this funny feeling, almost like I was being watched. I gasped for his benefit, mainly because he felt he told something ultra frightening. So, as I was drinking some water from the fridge, I heard the dishes clank loudly together in the sink. I wonder if he dreamt all this up. I thought he was getting himself worked up over nothing. I decided to guilt trip him. You see, Pablo was probably a little upset over your little comment last night. I was trying to keep myself from laughing at his reaction to this. He looked like he just realized something. You really think so? He just paced back and forth. Well, he's gotta know I meant no disrespect. Hey, let's summon Pablo again tonight so I can apologize. Hugo stressed as he repeatedly snapped his fingers. No way, I intervened. We don't know if we will ever get him back again. And besides that, Manny did say it was dangerous to do that at all. Yeah, I know, but nothing, man. Just talk to him tonight in the kitchen and simply apologize. End of story. Hugo just kept looking down. Do you think that'll be enough? It has to, I whispered as a customer strolled by with a shopping cart. It's not like he's so angry at you. I mean, he would have thrown those dishes at you if he was. He just took a long look at me as he got lost in thought. Alright, I'll do that. Thanks, he responded as he walked away. After that, I never heard anything else regarding Pablo from him again. There have been occasions where sometimes I would hear a dish in the kitchen move ever so slightly. Even now, almost 17 years later, I would still blame it on the positioning of the dishes on the tray. But, then again, I wonder if it is really Pablo. One day at work in 2009, I was standing towards the store entrance waiting for a customer to arrive. On this slow day, a coworker, Frank, who worked in the technical service for wireless devices, came over next to me. I remember him as someone who was extremely nice to customers and coworkers alike. I told him how I couldn't recall ever seeing him upset. He laughed and stated, "Well, I wasn't always like that. Back then, I would always get angry and snap at anyone who dared to talk to me," he continued. Frank mentioned how there was something that happened to him as an 8-year-old that made him change his ways. On a late evening, Frank was in the living room watching TV. His mom entered the room and asked him to take out the trash. "I'll get to it when I can," he snapped. Visibly upset, his mom mentioned how he never does follow through on doing his chores and that his siblings are the ones who end up doing them. "Ma, I told you I'll get to it later." Frank's mom turned on the lights and stormed towards the TV and shut it off. She quickly faced him and warned him to take out the trash and to do it now. Frank huffed as he got up to go to the kitchen. He was cursing to himself as he grabbed a garbage bag. He went outside the kitchen door and stomped through the driveway on his way to the garbage bins in the backyard. As he arrived, Frank lifted his gaze towards the garbage bins. What he saw quickly halted him into a paralyzed state. Frank noticed a black figure standing on top of the garbage bins. It was darker than the background night. He first noticed the hooves as feet and the horns on its head. The figure stood perfectly still as Frank started to breathe harder. After what seemed like time was frozen while he just stood there looking at this black demonic figure, Frank dropped the bag, turned around, and ran back to his house. He collapsed in the kitchen when his mom saw him. She asked what happened. Frank just pointed to the door while shaking. His mom just shook her head. You saw something dark, didn't you? See? Your attitude attracts negative energy. There you go. I just looked at Frank. He nodded. I wasn't religious back then, he quietly stated. But from that night on, I realized that if the evil side exists, then so must God. I just nodded as Frank walked away with a smile and nod, noticing a customer approaching the entrance. So, on a fine day, I got a text from one of my friends. It's a good rainy day. Let's go to a waterfall nearby. Where did they get the energy to climb a hill when it was raining so heavily? Why can't they just enjoy a nice cup of tea or coffee with a music playlist? Oh well, either way, there was no point in saying no because they would surely drag me out of my house anyway. So, we decided to set out in the evening and ended up arriving around 5:30. Despite originally planning to laze around in my room, the thought of witnessing the mountain covered with the lush blanket of fog and a distant view of the waterfall made the trip well worth it. Also, it would be less crowded there as it was a weekday. When we started climbing, it took the four of us around 15 to 20 minutes to reach the waterfall. The view of the city from up there was mesmerizing. There was a very small area surrounded by big rocks at the summit of the waterfall. The flow had created hot spring style potholes one below another. There were a few people up there, around 4 to 5 others aside from us. As the waterfall was loud, it was hard to communicate without yelling. Despite the loud silence of not speaking, our group would just enjoy each other's company without having the need for conversation. We all sat in one of the potholes in silence, just vibing with the feel of flowing water. We ended up drifting off from taking in the enchanted view and listening to the blissful sound of the waterfall. After some time passed, I noticed a small broken branch of a white flower flowing beside me. I watched it as it flowed down from one pothole to another. I recalled how peaceful it was watching the broken branch flow off until it went out of view into a thick forest. That was when I was jolted out of my daydream. I looked back wondering what my friends were up to, and found them all still daydreaming as they were all laying down enjoying the sound flow, gazing up at the sky. I then noticed something strange. It was so quiet that I couldn't hear people laughing or talking like before. I looked back and realized the place was deserted. We were the only ones left behind. When I checked my watch, I felt uneasy. By the time we came here and sat down, it was around 6 p.m. I was sure we spent 15 minutes idling around. But there was a 45-minute gap which couldn't be accounted for. When I told the rest of the group that it was 7 p.m., they all thought I was joking around. But, after confirming the time themselves, they all had confused look on their faces. For the moment, we decided not to overthink the situation and instead started to head back as it was getting dark. As we started our way down while chit-chatting, I was still bothered by the fact that the four of us were just sitting there for almost an hour and none of us noticed that the other people had left. But, as my thoughts were preoccupied with this, I heard a distant whistling sound come from the forest edge of the trail we were walking. Just to give a clear idea of the trail, it was a narrow path on the edge of the hill and down below leading towards a slide of deep forestation. I looked at my friends to see if anyone else heard it too, but they all seemed to be busy with their conversation. I shrugged, thinking it was just maybe a bird. As I continued a few steps down, I heard it again, a whistle that sounded very human. I watched my friends walking in front of me as they all looked in the same direction down at the forested edge. Upon hearing it, the whistle sounded casual, but As we quickened our pace, the tone changed and sounded like it wanted our attention. By then, any conversation between our group was slowly dying down as we were starting to realize the strangeness of the situation. What I also noticed was that the whistling was consistently heard from the same distance, even though we were moving faster, almost as if it was following us. And as we were starting to slowly panic, the sun was starting to set, which meant that we had only a matter of minutes before it would become dark. We were almost out of the forested area, but it was pitch dark, and we were at the mercy of the flashlight of our phones. And the slippery, muddy trails were not doing us any favors on getting the hell out of there. I was walking ahead of the group to help my friends get by the slippery slopes during our descent. I was starting to be a little hopeful as we were nearing out of the pitch dark forest. This wishful thinking was erased as there was a sudden breaking of a branch behind us. And that was quickly followed with a slow whistle that sent a chill down everyone's spine. As my heart was racing faster than ever, I looked back, and everyone was frozen still like statues. I really wanted to point the flashlight in the direction of the whistle, but something inside my head screamed for me to leave it alone. I somehow calmed myself and instead moved the light to check on my friends. 2 of them were holding it together, but the one who was walking last had tears in her eyes and was ready to give up and scream her lungs out for help. I honestly believe she would have done it if she wasn't paralyzed by fear. I could sense that none of them wanted to be standing at the end of the line. And I knew that everyone, including me, just wanted to run like hell, but that would have only led to some serious injury as the path was filled with sharp stones. I mustered whatever courage I had left not to panic, and walked back to tap on her shoulders, signaling her to move forward while quietly joking about how she was slowing us down. In my mind, I begged for them to quietly move along, and thankfully, for their sake, they laughed awkwardly and paced forward. All life on Earth, including humans, animals, and even insects, share one thing that has been hardwired in their DNA, and that is instinct, a necessity for survival. At the moment, not so much out of fear, there was something within us telling us that something was lurking in that slope of thick forest not far behind us. That steep slope was nearly impossible to stand or walk through for any normal human. Somehow, we all knew that, and we absolutely couldn't afford to acknowledge the whistle or that there was something within those bushes. After what felt like forever, we finally managed to get out of the forest as we rushed towards our bike and took off as fast as we could. The sound of traffic and building lights calmed us down. I noticed we were all shivering from the cold and fear. We made a stop at a tea stall. The warmth of tea was soothing as time passed by, which allowed our fears to fade away. What happened to us? Were we scared of random noises? Was our brain messing with us out of fear? We sat huddled together discussing many theories and logical reasonings and came up with the best theory. It could have been a bird that mimicked human sound. Sounds reasonable, right? After all, crows and parrots can basically have conversations. How hard can it be for a bird to whistle? In the end, we all shrugged it off. As days passed by, it still didn't fit right with me. So, I decided to do some research about this place. And to my surprise, there were no native birds that could mimic sounds. Also, it was supposed to be the hunting grounds for kites. So, birds smaller in size tend to avoid the area, which threw the parrot theory out of the equation. As I went down the rabbit hole, I found something that made my blood run cold. Apparently, there were several cases of suicides and accidental deaths of many men, women, and children, some of which the bodies were never found. The police would always seal the entrance with barricades during heavy rainy days. but some locals would manage to slip past and would later suffer unfortunate accidents. I cannot find any stories like ours, but then again, this spot wasn't known to many except for the locals here. To this day, I have no explanation as to what could have happened to us that evening. Was it a ghost? Something out of folklore like Skinwalker? Or a mind game propagated by fear? I have no choice but to leave this to my imagination.